This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so the scenario I'm going to walk you through is I'm a user in the accounts payable department. I receive emails with vendor documents attached. And my job is to process those attachments, which can be a potentially time-consuming, error-prone process. Our solution, the demo, is going to focus on those repeatable, predictable tasks associated with any process. So in this case, our robot's going to monitor a designated folder or inbox for incoming emails, take the attachments, extract information from those documents that are attached, and then run some validation rules to determine whether or not the document is to be considered valid. And if not, those documents will be routed to a user for manual intervention, maybe some correction or verification of data. And then once that has completed, once the document is considered to be valid, that information will be handed off to the back-end ERP system. So if I flip over to my email, I can see in my inbox here, I have an invoice from Tech Data. So maybe the current process is to say, download the attachment, open it up, do some searches maybe in some other systems to make sure the information's valid, maybe upload the document to a content management system or copy out to the network. But in our case, all we need to do is I'm going to indicate that this should be processed by the robot. So I'm going to route that to the inbox that we're monitoring. So behind the scenes here, what's happening is our robot has logged into the mail server, Microsoft Exchange in this case. For every email that has an attachment, it's taken the attachment and initiated that document transformation process. And within that process, the robot is doing the data extraction. We're dealing with an invoice here, so it's pulling invoice number, invoice date, PO number, and also doing some lookups to make sure that the information that is extracted is valid. So for example, it's a valid PO number, or the invoice date is within certain parameters. Maybe it can't be in the future, things of that sort. And if the invoice is not valid, it is routed to a user for validation or correction. And that notification, the robot actually sends out an email to indicate that the user needs to do some additional work here.
This conference will now be recorded.
So I can see I now have an email in my inbox that indicates that I submitted an invoice, but it requires some user validation and provides a link for me to log in. And what we see is my Tech Data invoice here, all the information that we've extracted from it, vendor information, invoice information, and it wants me to validate the vendor to make sure it's indeed Tech Data, which it is, but also the invoice date. It's not confidently extracted this value. It looks like the 2 is a little fuzzy, so it just wants me to validate this. But before I do that, let's quickly flip over and show that we're extracting all the line items here. We're also doing some pulling the totals, doing some math to make sure everything adds up here, that this invoice contains accurate information. So once I validate the invoice date, close the batch. We now have an invoice that is considered valid, and our robot is going to transfer that information to the back-end line of business system. In our case, it's a Customer 360 app, which represents our ERP system, but could really be any back-end system that you have. So in a second here, we will see that our robot will log into the application. It's going to it's going to enter all the information automatically that would otherwise be entered manually by a user. So all of our header data and all of our line items that we see coming across here. And as an indication that the process is complete, the robot kind of wraps things up by sending a notification email here that I've submitted that invoice for extraction. It was successfully completed, and here's the information.